before anybody was involved with it. And I said, okay, I think I get it. Yeah, the Fred Rogers of it all. When she and I corresponded about trying to find something to do together.
For decades, Tom Hanks has been Hollywood's safest name. America's dad. The man you trust automatically. The actor whose voice sounds like reassurance itself. When he talks about love, family, or morality, people listen because his life seems to back it up. A long, steady marriage to Rita Wilson. Well-adjusted kids. No tabloid meltdowns. No public bitterness. But there is one subject Tom Hanks almost never touches in detail. One chapter he consistently skirts around. One marriage that exists mostly as a footnote whenever his life story is told. His first wife. And the reason isn't nostalgia, embarrassment, or old grudges. It's much uglier than that. Tom Hanks' first marriage, to Samantha Lewis, born Susan Dillingham, was not just a youthful mistake or a relationship that it didn't work out. According to new revelations from the one person who lived inside that marriage's aftermath, it was the beginning of a childhood shaped by instability, fear, and emotional damage that took decades to fully understand. That person is Elizabeth Ann Hanks, his daughter. And her memoir quietly explains why her father rarely speaks about Samantha at all. When Tom met Susan Dillingham in the 1970s, he was nobody. A broke theater kid at California State University in Sacramento with ambition and very little else. Susan, who would later go by the stage name Samantha Salus, shared his passion for acting, his hunger for something bigger, and his sense of being on the outside of the industry looking in. They weren't glamorous, they weren't polished, they were young, hopeful, and building something from scratch. They fell in love fast. Too fast, maybe. But that's easy to do when you're young and poor and dreaming together. Their son, Colin, was born in 1977. Tom and Samantha married the following year. Elizabeth followed in 1982. For a while, they were a real family in every sense. A struggling one, but intact. They lived modestly. Tom chased auditions. Samantha held things together at home. It was the kind of marriage built on survival, not luxury. And then Tom Hanks became Tom Hanks. As his career took off in the early 1980s, the balance shifted. Long absences, growing pressure, fame creeping in before either of them had the emotional tools to handle it. By 1985, the marriage was cracking. By 1987, it was over. On paper, it looks like a standard Hollywood divorce. Early marriage, career growth, separate paths. But that version leaves out the damage that followed. Elizabeth Hanks's memoir doesn't paint her parents as villains or heroes. It paints them as what she calls two hurt kids trying to dig out of a well together. That line alone explains more than any press release ever could. This wasn't a clean break followed by co-parenting harmony. It was a fractured family trying and failing to function. After the divorce, Elizabeth and Colin lived primarily with their mother. Tom remained present, but in limited windows, weekends, summers, holidays. The structure looked stable from the outside. Inside, it was anything but. Elizabeth describes her childhood as years filled with confusion, violence, deprivation, and love. That sentence doesn't soften itself. It doesn't try to protect reputations. It tells the truth plainly. One of the most chilling moments in her memoir involves Tom discovering, by accident, that his children were no longer where he thought they were. He went to pick them up from school in Los Angeles. They weren't there. They hadn't been for weeks. Samantha had moved them to Sacramento without telling him. He had to track them down. That moment alone explains why Tom Hanks does not speak freely about this marriage. Because no matter how gently you tell that story, it ends with the father realizing he has lost control over his children's safety and stability. Elizabeth's memories of life with her mother are not painted in cruelty for shock value. They are specific, concrete, the kind of details people don't invent. She remembers a beautiful house that slowly decayed, a backyard once full of promise becoming unusable due to neglect, a home filled with smoke. chaos creeping in quietly, then loudly. She describes emotional distance, unpredictability, and moments that crossed into physical fear. She does not sensationalize them. She simply names them. At the center of it all was Samantha's declining mental health. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because mental illness doesn't fit neatly into hero-villain narratives. Elizabeth doesn't portray her mother as evil. She portrays her as unwell, unstable, loving at times, harmful at others. A woman who may have loved her children deeply but could not consistently protect or nurture them. Tom Hanks, meanwhile, was building a career that would make him one of the most recognizable men on earth. But success did not come with power over what happened inside his ex-wife's home. He worried about his children constantly. He has admitted publicly that he feared he had sentenced them to the same emotional pain he experienced in his own childhood. That guilt never left him. And guilt changes how people speak about the past. Samantha Lewis died in 2002 at just 49 years old, after battling bone cancer. By then, Tom had been married to Rita Wilson for years. His life had stabilized. His children were older. But death freezes narratives. You can't argue with it. You can't defend yourself against it. And you can't correct it without reopening wounds. So Tom stayed quiet. Elizabeth's book doesn't accuse her father of abandonment or indifference. In fact, it suggests the opposite. She describes him as present when he could be, supportive when she needed him, and deeply affected by what his children endured. Tom himself has publicly praised her honesty, calling her a bold, journalistic, literate mind, and acknowledging that we all come from checkered, cracked lives. That sentence is Tom Hanks telling the truth without spilling private blood. Because here's the ugly reason he doesn't talk about his first wife. There is no version of that story that doesn't involve pain on all sides. No way to discuss it without exposing the reality that love, youth, fame, and mental illness collided, and children paid the price. Talking about Samantha publicly would mean discussing her struggles in detail. It would mean revisiting custody decisions, moments of fear, and years he likely wishes he could redo. It would mean defending himself without attacking someone who cannot respond. And Tom Hanks is not that kind of man. Silence, in this case, isn't avoidance, it's restraint. His long marriage to Rita Wilson often gets framed as a redemption arc. But that's too simplistic. It wasn't redemption, it was growth. It was learning from a painful first attempt at adulthood. It was choosing stability after chaos. It was building something carefully instead of quickly. Elizabeth's memoir doesn't exist to tear down her parents. It exists to understand them, to place her childhood in context, to make peace with the contradictions, love and harm, safety and fear, absence and effort. And in doing so, it finally explains why Tom Hanks has never turned his first marriage into a story he tells. Because some stories don't belong to the public. They belong to the people who survived them,